Hello and welcome to this eCampus News webinar, How to Create a Mass Notification Ecosystem that Reaches Everyone on Campus. My name is Chris Hobson and I am the Custom Content Manager for eCampus News. And I'm excited to have you join us for what should be a very informative session. Today's webinar is sponsored by SingleWire Software. SingleWire Software is a developer of InformaCast, a leading software solution for fast and reliable emergency notifications. More than 7,000 organizations in over 50 countries use InformaCast for emergency mass notifications. Before I introduce our presenter, I'd like to take a minute to go over some features of the platform that we're using for this webinar. Today's event will be recorded, so you don't have to worry about missing a thing. Within a few days, you'll receive an email message that contains a link to the recorded webinar along with a PDF of the slides. You can submit questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on the Q&A box. There will be time at the end of our presentation for our speaker to address these questions. Also, there is a group chat function that you can launch by clicking on chat. Feel free to use this feature to contact someone from the eCampus News team if you have a technical question. But please don't use this feature to ask questions of our speaker. If you have a question for the speaker, you can use the Q&A box that I just mentioned. With these housekeeping items out of the way, let's get started with our presentation. The presenter today is Pat Shekel, Executive Vice President of Product Management for SingleWire Software. Pat has more than 15 years of experience helping organizations across a wide range of industries implement tools that enhance safety and communication. At this time, I'm going to turn things over to Pat to begin the presentation.
Well, thank you, Chris. So a little bit of background on who is SingleWire Software. SingleWire is, as Chris mentioned, the maker of InformaCast, which was originally developed in 2001 after 9/11, specifically in response to the federal government mandate from Homeland Security Department to evacuate buildings within 15 minutes of an emergency. That was the very first version of InformaCast, really centered around sending broadcast messages to phone handsets and then later to IP speakers and desktops. When most people think of mass notification, they think of mobile mass notification, sending bulk SMS text messages, maybe phone calls from the cloud, et cetera. We do that too. We started that about 6 or 7 years ago, but we started out with on-premises notification. And today, in this ecosystem talk, you're going to learn a lot about that, about tying into the existing things that you likely already have inside of your buildings and making them work as part of a larger mass notification ecosystem. So SingleWire as a company is based in Madison, Wisconsin. For the international folks on the line, that's about 2 hours northwest of Chicago. We have about 110 people on staff, and we do have about 7,000 customers in 50 countries. We've been on the global price list for Cisco systems for over a decade, which gives us that reach. So when you look at typical use cases for InformaCast, they're typically emergency notification centered, although they don't have to be. The content is whatever the customer wants it to be. So it can be informational in nature, can be workflow related, as you see some of the things there at the bottom. But really when people are coming to us, they're often looking at issues that are emergency related. So they're looking at severe weather, they're looking at active shooter, chemical spill, those sorts of things are often top of mind for them. Our platform is really centered around 3 main principles, speed being one of them, so fairly obvious, how quickly can I get a message out to everybody, reach, which is featured here, so how close to 100% of my desired population can I reach, and then urgency or intrusiveness. So how well does the notification itself grab people's attention? So we're going to talk about those here briefly because as you can see, this ties into the ecosystem. The ecosystem is going to largely be based around those things that are either sending inbound to a notification system or that the notification system can reach as an endpoint. So sending text, audio, and or an image to these different devices. What we're showing here is half of what we call our any to any diagram, meaning we can send from just about anything and send to just about anything. And when you look at this, the reach is really achieved by sending alerts to all these different devices. Some of those, like the ones at the top, are going to be inside of your network. Others are going to be mobile, and still others are going to be collaboration systems that you can reach people on. And we're going to talk about most of these categories in greater depth as we go on, so I'm not going to belabor this slide. I will point out, though, the last piece you can see are the triggers. So think of it as a Swiss Army knife of mass notification. If we can't reach them on one of the pre-built integrations and someone comes to us and says, well, do you talk to this type of digital signage? Then we'll say, well, not today, that's not one we're familiar with, but you can get there using either CAP or RSS, just as an example. So now onto the second main tenet of Informacast. Again, the reach we covered, there's speed, and then there's intrusiveness. Speed is all about getting that message launched quickly, and it's also about how quickly the system itself can deliver the alert. And speed, in terms of getting the alert out quickly, often has to do with an automated trigger. So you think about how you can tie into a national weather service, for example. You can tie into a physical security system. You can tie into early earthquake warning or gunshot detection or things like that. So an event happens in your environment, and you don't have to have any human interaction in order to trigger an alert. That helps with, that's one thing, of course, that can help with speed. The other is how quickly can the system deliver it. So that's about infrastructure and architecture and capacity. And that's something that we have spent 2 decades building. And it's also about what platforms are you choosing to send to? So are you reliant upon other people or other systems, other organizations? For example, SMS text messaging often works great, but there may be times when you have a regional emergency and the carriers are throttling the speed of SMS messages being sent. There may be times when calling doesn't work very well for the same sorts of reasons, where everyone's trying to call at once. And you think about things like the Boston Marathon bombing, where cell calls weren't going through, the Minneapolis I-35 bridge collapse when there was so much local congestion traffic. You think about cell towers being impaired in the California wildfires. There are countless other examples where things have happened over time, and the cell networks have been either down or overloaded in some way. So they're a very necessary component. We're not saying don't use mobile mass notification. It's an absolutely necessary component, but it's insufficient on its own. You want to have other methods, both inbound and outbound. And then another hallmark is intrusiveness or urgency. So there's been a lot of research done on this, where if you just send a text message to people, they may or may not take action on it because it just doesn't seem very urgent. However, if you send an audio broadcast with spoken instructions, they're much more likely to take action. And this has been shown over and over again in experiments where they do a controlled study, and they'll have a group of people in like a break room or lunchroom at an organization, like at a business, and they'll sound the fire alarm, just the typical fire alarm where it's just the tone going off. And people will look at each other and they'll go back to doing whatever they're doing. They don't get up and they don't leave. And from the outside looking in, you're like, what are they doing? Why don't they get up and leave? And I think it's because, to a certain extent, people have been conditioned to think that, oh, it's a drill, I don't need to leave. And on the other hand, there's a lot of group think going on. People look around, they take cues from other people. And if there's a tipping point where if most of the people are sitting down and not leaving, then other people are going to say, well, I don't want to be the person to look like I'm afraid of what they think might be a fire drill and not an actual fire. So you contrast that, that's the control group, right? And you can contrast that with an actual spoken alarm. So you still have the tone, and then it's interspersed with, this is not a drill, there's a fire in the building, evacuate immediately. And you see people, instead of taking 10 minutes to get up and leave, they leave in the first minute, they leave immediately. And so it's just a study in human behavior. And so what we like to talk about is, well, if you're doing that for fire alarms, and that sort of spoken voice alarm is now nearly ubiquitous across the United States and in many other countries as well, because it's proven to be so effective. And so it's built into the fire codes now. When we say, well, if you have a severe weather alert or you have an active shooter alert, why are you just sending a text message? Wouldn't you want to create that same level of urgency? And so that's why streaming audio to the different devices that support it. And if you can see here behind me, I have a number of these devices, and I'll give a brief demonstration later where I light these devices up. Things like desk phones, turning all of your desk phones into emergency speakers, your PCs, your paging, whether that's traditional overhead paging or IP speakers. So when you bring this all together, again, this is what we call our any-to-any diagram, the things that we're sending from or triggering from on the left and the things that we're sending to on the right. And again, our differentiation in the marketplace is that we can send to both mobile and your on-premises devices, whereas most mass notification systems are taking one approach or the other. And really most of them that we compete with are centered around the mobile notification. They may be able to get to computer desktops, but they're not doing broadcast audio to phones, desktops, overhead speakers, et cetera. And that's really the distinction. So now we'll talk about, that was just kind of level set, give you a foundation of where we're coming from in this discussion today. We're going to talk about designing your ecosystem. And designing your ecosystem is all about leveraging what you already have. But let's start with an actual scenario that happened at a customer of ours. This was a healthcare system in the upper Midwest in one of the Great Lakes states. They had what they believed was an active shooter situation. It turned out it was a shot fired, but it was not an active shooter. But they thought it was at the time. It turns out there was a troubled young man who drove to the parking lot on their campus and took his life with a gunshot, but they thought it was an active shooter situation. They have 30,000 staff working at this large hospital complex. And the alert that went out was ineffective. They were not using our system at the time, but they were using a typical mobile mass notification system. And a lot of people didn't get the alert. And so they were upset. They're like, well, had this been an active shooter, a real active shooter, like we wouldn't have received the alert and we would have been put in harm's way potentially. So people were unhappy with that. So they did a postmortem survey and they asked their staff, how do you want to be notified? And the interesting thing was people responded with whatever they happened to be doing that morning. So they said, well, I was off campus, I want a text message. I was at my desk, I want a computer desktop pop up. I was on a call, a video call, I want it to pop up and really grab my attention. I was walking in between two buildings in the Skyway Bridge. I know there's speakers in there, I want that to tell me what's happening. And the takeaway is that you don't know what you're going to be doing the next time there's an incident, whether that's active shooter or severe weather or whatever it is. So sending to all the different communication methods that are available to you will increase the speed, the reach, the intrusiveness, which all adds up to more effective notifications. In the end, the reason we send notifications is because we want people to take a certain action. And multi-channel notification, sending to lots of different devices all at once in certain scenarios is very important. Obviously, these things can be grouped, and if you're talking something more informational, you're probably not going to be taking such drastic steps. But if you have something as important as an active shooter scenario, you want to be sending to all the different types of communication that are available. So this is our ecosystem wheel, and this is representative of some of the categories and some of the vendors that we work with and that have essentially built integrations with Informacast, or we built integrations to them. Suffice it to say that there are documented support integrations for each of these. We're going to go through most of these and just kind of talk to them so you get an idea of what we're talking about here. The basic premise is this. One, we want to be able to reuse whatever you have, right? So if you have a given digital signage vendor, we want to be able to talk to it. If you have a panic button system, we want to be able to talk to it. It also helps though, because if you're looking at designing an ecosystem, you're going to make investments. You might want to look here and say, okay, well, what do you have that works? So because I need some IP speaker support. I have a common area where I want visual and audio alerting. Which one should I work with? That sort of thing. So first, let's talk about phone system support. And the phone system might be not an obvious one. To us it is, because it's where we started. But for a lot of people, it's not. They're like, well, can't we call the phones? And the answer is yes, but there's a problem with that. So yeah, you can call any phone from the cloud service, including from our cloud service. The reason you don't want to do that is, one, it's very slow. Even if you can make hundreds of calls a second. And the flip side of that is, the faster it is, the more likely you're going to run into scale problems, because you don't have enough trunking capacity out to the outside world to allow those calls to come in at a sufficiently quick rate. And without getting too far into the weeds, know that it does not scale well. If you want to have a deeper technical conversation about that, let us know. We also have a blog post that covers this in great technical detail. But for the scope of this discussion, know that calling phones doesn't work very well at all. What we do is we broadcast to the phones, to many different types of IP phones. And the reason this matters is because we can, without calling the phone, we can broadcast audio to it across your network. And that gives us a couple of advantages. One, no one has to answer the phone. It just starts playing audio out the speaker of the phone. And so every phone is turned into an emergency notification speaker. The other advantage is scale. We're using multicast on the network, which means that we can send to thousands of phones at once. Our very first customer was the US Department of Commerce, and they were sending to 4,200 phones at once back in 2002. And we've only grown in terms of size of customers that are sending to 10,000, 20,000, 40,000 phones all at once. So it allows you to scale in a way that, calling the phones could never come close, where it would take minutes or even hours to call that many phones. We can send to all of them in seconds. Next is IP speakers. So back in the mid 2000s, we developed an IP speaker protocol that gave us the ability, and again, instead of calling speakers using SIP, which is a common way of doing it, if you're only reaching a handful of speakers, we developed a protocol, patented that, licensed it to these manufacturers that you see at the right. So inside of an IP speaker, there's a little network board. And typically that's doing two things. One, it's power over Ethernet, so it's providing power to the speaker, and it's also giving it intelligence. And that intelligence includes our protocol running on the firmware of the speaker. And the reason that matters is that we are able then to zone those speakers in either individually or in unlimited numbers of groups. So if you had 500 speakers, you could have 500 groups or 50 groups or 10 or whatever makes sense for your organization. So we can get very granular with the alerting, and we can also send to all of them all at once, even across multiple buildings. So if you have a campus that maybe has 30 or 130 buildings and you want to send out an alert to all of them at once, we can do that. Now, I should mention that if you have an existing overhead paging system, a traditional overhead paging system, Bogan, Valcom, Viking, Rowland, etc., we can send to those too. You don't have to rip and replace that, and we would never suggest doing that. So it makes sense to reuse what you can, and we'll tie into that. We have two different technical methods of doing that. It works for every, one of those two methods will work for every system out there. But in a lot of cases, you have an existing overhead paging system, and it doesn't cover the whole building adequately. So you're looking at maybe adding in hallways, or adding in like a cafeteria break room area, or maybe in a distribution center or a factory environment where you need to have not only audio alerting, but you want visual alerting, so that when someone sends an alert, there's a flashing LED and then scrolling text in case that, it's very loud, they're wearing hearing protection and they're not able to hear anything, but the LED flashing will draw their attention to the sign and they'll be able to read it. So it's that mixed environment where maybe you're using your existing analog overhead paging system, we're sending audio into it, but we're also then sending audio and visual notification to IP speakers in places where it makes sense. Now, the one time it does make a lot of sense to put in all IP speakers is if you're doing a greenfield deployment. because then you don't need a head end or an amplifier. Each of these speakers is self-amplified. It just plugs into the network on a Cat 5 or Cat 6 cable. It's power over Ethernet. You plug it in just like you would a laptop or an IP phone, and you're off to the races. So that's where that makes a lot of sense. So it just, again, depends on the use case. And we have reseller and integration partners that are very good at working with you to understand your needs and to come up with a solution that, one, uses what you already have, but two, augments it in a way that you can get that notification out to everybody very quickly and very effectively. And so you saw there was 10 different manufacturers there. Some of them have 10, 20, 30 different form factors of IP speakers. And we had, if I go back a slide here, you see a handful of them here, wall mount speakers, some with an LED screen, some with an LCD screen, others that are just audio only. And they come in, like I said, all different form factors. You can see some of those on the wall here behind me. I'll take down the screen sharing when I do a little bit of a demo, and you get a little bit better look in terms of screen real estate. But know that they come in large signboards, 5 feet across. They come in outdoor weatherproof configurations where there is no visual components, just audio. Those same sorts of devices can work in like a warehouse or factory environment. They can withstand a hose hit. They're waterproof to a certain extent. Two-sided speakers for hallways and so forth. So we took either 9 or 10 different categories of these IP speakers and we put them into our speaker guide. We started doing this 3 years ago. And the reason was, like, we don't make these speakers ourselves, but as I said, it's our patented protocol running in the firmware. And people were looking for answers. They're coming to us and they're saying, well, we're using these speakers with your solution, with your software. Can you tell us which speaker we should use? And we would point them to a page and say, we're neutral. Just any of these will work for you. But people want advice, they want consultation. And so we broke that neutrality about 3 years ago and said, we're going to collect the information from the manufacturers, and based on what we know about the use case and what we know about the supportability and so forth, we're going to share that information with people and put that into a PDF that's a speaker guide. And you can go to that URL on the screen there and you can download it. And like I said, we're breaking these up by categories. So best speaker for healthcare, best speaker for a classroom environment, best speaker for outdoor, and so on. I think there are 9 or 10 different categories. So next we'll talk about panic buttons. And in the brief demonstration that I'll give here after a little while, I'm going to go ahead and show some of these. What we're showing here are just the different types of panic buttons. So when we say panic button, what the button does is again up to you. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're panicking. It could be, that's just an industry term. It can be a call for help. It can be like, reception areas often have these, right? So you got someone working the front desk, someone comes in off the street, that person working the front desk feels uneasy for whatever reason. Maybe the person is exhibiting odd behavior or fails to sign in at the front desk and tries to walk right past, whatever the case may be. And you want them to be able to ask for help. And so again, you can see the different form factors here. I have a few of these on the wall behind me. One of the simplest ones is in the lower left there, just putting essentially a virtual panic button on a phone and having people hit the phone. The reason you might not want to do that is you might be concerned that person could be seen reaching to press the button. And so that's why the one on the top left there, the one that says advanced network devices on it, you can see how that's built. It's intended to be screwed into the underside of a desk or a table, and that way someone could discreetly trigger it. Whereas other ones, like in the bottom right, that's an intercom button that also doubles as a call button. There, maybe you're in a high traffic area with heavy employee turnover, and you don't want to have to train people as to where the call button is. You want them to understand, like, hey, it's here, just anyone can press it if you need it, that sort of thing. And then of course the ability to have a virtual panic button or mobile panic button on the phone using the app. So a lot of different form factors, and it really just depends on your use case and what you're trying to do in any given scenario. So I think this would be a good place just to take a pause. And Chris, if you want to throw up the first poll question, we have 3 poll questions that we're doing today. And we'll go ahead and pop that to the screen, and we'll see what people are saying. You can read it here. Are you currently able to reach everyone on campus with an alert during an emergency? So I'd encourage you to go ahead and answer that, and we'll bring up the results here momentarily. So again, are you able to reach everyone on campus with an alert during an emergency? And I encourage you to think about the last time that you either did a drill or had a real emergency, and to just estimate, where do you think you were? And we say everyone, let's use like a 90% cutoff if you haven't answered yet. Because I know trying to reach absolutely everyone is a pretty high bar. Maybe we should have phrased the question a little bit differently. All right. So we'll move along here, and we get yes. We had 6 responses, and 5 people say that yes, they can reach everyone on campus. That's great. And 1 that said no. The rest of you, I hope you wake up soon, because we know there's more than 6 people on the line. All right. Next category is digital signage, and we'll have 2 more poll questions. So you'll have another opportunity to answer about what your experiences are. So when you look at digital signage, there's been a proliferation of digital signage and digital signage manufacturers really over the last 5 to 10 years. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One, the software has gotten a lot better. So it's a lot easier to deploy and manage, to get your content out to those screens. The other is that, as we all know, anyone who shot for a TV 10 years ago and then done it recently, the price points on TVs are ridiculously low by historical standards. So it's just a lot cheaper to put up the hardware. And so what we see people doing is, you have these like in different places, maybe in hallways, break rooms, typically lobby areas where they may be rotating information about an organization. And people want to take over those screens when there's an emergency and use them as a visual endpoint. And they want to send emergency information, maybe just informational. Some software can scroll across the bottom the way you would see like a news ticker. Others will take over, depending on the use case, take over the entire screen. And we see creative use cases too. We see wayfinding as being probably the most applicable and relevant to the emergency notification discussion, where the software is intelligent enough that when you send an alert, depending on the type of alert, whether it's shelter in place or whether it's evacuate, it will serve as wayfinding. So it'll give you an arrow, go this way, take the next left, that sort of thing. Typically, we're brought into this where an organization already has digital signage of some sort, and they're adopting our software and implementing it, and they say, can you work with what we have? And you can see there are 10 different digital signage manufacturers with their logos over there. These are the ones that we have tested integrations with. So it's almost certain that if you have a flavor of digital signage that isn't represented here, that we will be able to work with it. And what we're seeing is that the industry is coalescing around the Common Alerting Protocol, or CAP. It used to be RSS, or it used to be, here's our API, can you write to it, which is a really clumsy way to write to, dozens of different digital signage manufacturers. But now, like I said, things are coalescing around CAP. And that's just it's a message format, can be delivered over XML or HTTP, and just works really well. And so we're seeing that's where things are going. We do have outbound CAP in our system. So we have inbound CAP where we get alerts, for example, from NOAA in the US, the National Weather Service. And on the outbound side, we can send CAP as a feed, and then the digital signage software will subscribe to our CAP feed. So that's how that works. And that just makes it, because it's a standard, just really easy to integrate to systems 11 through 50, for example, because digital signage is one of those technology areas that really has not seen a lot of consolidation yet. So next is contact closures, which maybe sounds a little bit more obscure, and it is, but it's what allows us to interact with the physical world. So the contact closure that everyone's probably most familiar with is your doorbell. That's a contact closure. So when your doorbell is pressed, it just completes a circuit, right? So it's binary. It's either open or it's closed. And what those manufacturers at the right make are gateways. And these gateways are devices that have Ethernet on the one side, and then they have contact closure relays out the other side. So those relays are just wire terminals that you connect a pair of wires to. And on the other end, you connect the thing that you want to talk to, like your access control system, your fire alarm panel, any of these other things. And so that gives us the ability to talk to the outside, to the physical world. So for example, there's an ice cream manufacturer in Iowa that's a customer of ours. And in a dairy producer, like an ice cream manufacturer, they have to use ammonia to kill the listeria at low temperatures. So it's great at that. That's why you can eat ice cream without getting listeria. The downside is that if the ammonia concentration in the air gets too high, people have serious breathing problems. And so they have sensors on the plant floor. And this particular plant floor is the size of 7 football fields. And so there's a lot of room to cover there. And they used to just sound an alert on a localized sensor. And the problem with that is someone would be on a forklift delivering a pallet of ice cream from one side of the plant to the other, and they could drive right through the ammonia cloud because their machine is making noise. There's other machinery making noise. The sensor's going off. They don't know anything about it, and they drive right through it. The flip side was you could evacuate the entire plant, but that's overkill for a plant that size, right? So how do you get a more granular notification out? You have a contact closure gateway attached to the ammonia sensor, which sends an inbound trigger to InformaCast, and we send out an alert and let people know exactly which area is affected, and then people know to stay away from that area. So that's just one use case. There are a number of others there. Probably the most common solution that we see is with access control systems, and that tends to be on the outbound side of InformaCast, meaning there's an alert that happens, and people want to lock any doors that aren't already locked. So, in a school lockdown situation, it's a real common scenario. So it just depends on what your use case is, but real easy way to tie into the physical world. So when we talk about, just another kind of quick case study here, when we talk about the importance of establishing your ecosystem, this particular use case or case study really speaks to that. And the reason is they had these different systems. They had half a dozen different systems. And so they would log into their giant voice system and send audio to the common areas. They would tweet. They would update their university homepage. They would go into their existing mass notification system, which sent text messages and emails and so on. And each of these systems would take time to log into, time to create the message, tweak it, depending on what the content was that they needed to send, and then send it. And so end to end, that whole thing would take 10 to 12 minutes. Well, what they did is they just tied all these things into InformaCast with out-of-the-box integrations. And then they asked us to train them, and it was their dispatchers, and it took 5 minutes, and they had allotted an hour, and they said, is that it? And we said, yeah, that's all there is to it, because you're just going here, you're clicking on the scenario, you're answering a couple questions, you're clicking send, and it's gone. And I'll show you what that looks like here in a moment, the user interface. But the idea is, again, speed and reach. So reaching all of their people and reaching them in a lot less time. So you can see the before and after. After it took less than 2 minutes to send out to every platform at an incredible scale. It's a very large university. This is an integration into RFID bracelets from Stanley Healthcare. And we don't have this deployed at a lot of hospitals, but we do have it deployed at some. And it really just brings a different level of customer care or patient care in this case. And what I mean by that is the old scenario was these are people that are at risk for wandering off, what they call, and they have a floor for this. So typically dementia, can be other things. And if someone crossed a threshold, they were wearing this bracelet, but it would just sound an alarm. And then a medical assistant would have to run down the hall after them and turn them around. And meanwhile, the alarm is sounding, it'd be confusing to the patient and so on. So what they did is they put in our solution, And Stanley Healthcare has an inbound integration to InformaCast. So when that person crosses the threshold, now what happens is there's a speaker, an IP speaker in the ceiling right above that threshold. So when they cross it, then in the spoken words of the loved one of that patient, they're told to turn around and go back to the room. So, hey, Uncle Jerry, turn around, everything's okay, go back to your room. Spoken by one of Uncle Jerry's loved ones. And they found that this was incredibly effective. So one, it was a kinder and gentler way to treat their people, their patients. And two, it required a lot less staff time to chase after people and turn them around. Now, if they cross a second threshold, then the old method would apply because they didn't want them to go out, in this case, on the streets of San Francisco. But it really worked well in the vast majority of cases. So next, we're going to talk about early earthquake warning. And I know this applies to 3 states, but on the West Coast. But it just shows you just the power of mass notification, where something that a lot of us had thought, you're never going to get an early warning for an earthquake. It just happens, right? And to a large extent, that's still true, but we can give people now up to 60 seconds of advance notice that an earthquake is coming. And this text here describes how that happens. Basically, the U.S. Geological Survey has sensors in the ground all up and down the West Coast. And so when the ground starts to shake in an area, they know, and the software can get out ahead of that because it takes time for that wave to ripple through the earth and to actually reach people. We can give people up to 60 seconds of advance warning. And there was a quake last year where I believe it was 48 seconds of advance warning for most of the people that were affected. And you say, well, what can I do in 48 seconds? Well, you can get out of a building, and we have municipalities that are able to automatically open the doors on their fire departments and get the engines out, because if those buildings are shaken to rubble and the trucks are trapped, then they can't go help other people that are affected. So that there are a number of things that can happen in that relatively short time window that can make a difference. So just in terms of what that looks like, the sensors go to our partner, Early Warning Labs, which sends an inbound trigger to us. And we're able to send out that text, that audio, in cases that support that image, to all these different endpoints and to give people that early warning. So I mentioned a little bit ago about how to trigger a message and the ease of doing that with that SEC University example. And you can see here the different tiles. I'm not going to give a demonstration of this just for the sake of time. That is the next step. If you would love to see a one-on-one demonstration where we talk about your particular use cases and we give you an in-depth look at the software itself, as well as a little bit more about lighting the things up here in the room, we'd love to do that. We'd love to schedule that demonstration with you. For the sake of today, we're going to give you a screenshot, and then I'm going to light up a couple of things manually here in a moment. But before I do that, Chris, why don't you bring up the second poll question? We'll just see where people stand on another issue. So you can see here, how many types of endpoints can you reach with your current mass notification system? So endpoints being like people's mobile phones is one endpoint, right? So if you're texting and using a push notification to mobile phones, that's still one endpoint. It's a mobile phone. So mobile phones, desk phones, overhead paging systems, computer desktop pop-ups, etc. Just curious, how many types of different endpoints can you reach with your current mass notification system? So go ahead and pop your answer into that poll question there, and then we'll go ahead and share the results here momentarily. All right, hopefully we have some results coming in there, and we'll move along from the slide perspective. When we look at, okay, so we have pretty wide distribution here. So we have 1, 2, or 3, kind of 2 and 3 tend to be the most popular. And that's what we find. You know, people are getting mobile devices, maybe mobile devices plus computer desktops, but many don't go beyond that. And if you recall the any-to-any slide, or just looking at the things around me here, we can get to a lot more than 2 or 3. So good information. A little bit about the reporting. So when I send an alert, I want to know how it did, how long did it take, how many people received it, that sort of thing. This is a look at our reporting dashboard. We have the ability to do desktop notification, of course. This is something that for us is relatively unique because there are other desktop notification products out there. The thing that makes ours unique is that we can send intrusive audio. So even if your laptop is muted, we can unmute it, take over the speakers, and broadcast audio out of it. And again, that's important because it's going to grab people's attention. And you might not want to do that for every type of alert. If you have something that's informational, like in a lot of healthcare environments, we have people that just want to scroll it across the bottom because they don't want to obscure the screen. For other environments, it's fine to take over the screen and they have to minimize it before they can go back to their work. So it's very intrusive. So that's a good way to go for a lot of people. Many of us knowledge workers are these days all day, every day working inside of collaboration tools like Microsoft Teams or Cisco WebEx Teams, and we can send from these platforms. We can also send into them so everyone can receive a pop-up inside of their tool. This is also a great way to transition into the alerting side of things and into incident management. So oftentimes you're not just sending out one alert and then the situation's done. You're sending an alert to notify people of an ongoing situation, then you need to send follow-up information, and you probably need to gather your incident response team and deal with the ongoing scenario. And what better way to do that than with a collaboration tool? And why not use the tool that you use all day, every day, and have things like your floor plans in there, your safety checklists. You can bring in video feeds of cameras and all those good things, right? So that's where these tools make a lot of sense. Is the sending part, yes, and getting the message confirmation back, we can do that inside the tool, just like we can do from inside of the app or from an SMS message where people respond and say, yes, I'm safe, or no, I need help. You can do that in these tools. But I think the real power is getting your safety or your incident response team together so they can be collaborating real time, from whether it's text messaging, video call, audio call, etc. So let's, I'm gonna stop sharing for just a moment, and just for the sake of time, I'm gonna light a couple things here up in the room. I'm just using the webcam in my laptop. I have a full room-based video unit that if you want to do a one-on-one demonstration, I encourage you to do that, and we can give you a greater depth in terms of what we're sharing. But just for the sake of today's exercise, I'm going to reach back here and turn my screen just a little bit there. And I'm gonna press a panic button and just give you an idea of what an alert can look like. And when I talk about intrusive audio, you'll understand what I mean in just a moment.
Panic button activated. Send help immediately.
So that's synchronized audio coming through all these different devices. You can see the 2 different types of IP speakers here above me. Broadcasted audio also have the ability to scroll text, one of them horizontally, the other one vertically. There's also a digital sign behind me. They go back to being clocks when they're not scrolling text. A little bit harder to see, but there's a digital sign here behind me. I can see that it's not picking up the color very well on that, but you get the idea of what we're trying to do here. We're really just taking advantage of the different devices and sending text and audio and really grabbing people's attention. And I can send an alert from the mobile phone. I can send an alert from, I have desk phones here next to me. I'm going to do one more, and that's, you see this is a defibrillator cabinet here, an AED cabinet. And the idea being that if someone goes and reaches for that, either they or someone they're trying to help is probably in duress. They're probably under, having cardiac arrest, right? And that's something the safety team would certainly want to know about. So we tie this into a contact closure device. A little hard to see, but it's right back here. Pair of wires connected in, right? So when I open this,
medical alert. AED box is activated in the demo room.
So again, the text, the audio is entirely your own. You can make it what you want it to be, but in this case, we're just letting people know that the AED cabinet was opened in the demo room. let's go back to the slides here. And I'm going to talk to you about Technip. So this is an oil and gas services company, happens to be located, this location is in France. SMS notifications were not working real well for them. And that's not uncommon. But they were deploying Microsoft Teams everywhere. And so they said, can we use Teams to get in touch with everybody? And they did. So they're sending to 4,500 employees on a regular basis through InformaCast using Microsoft Teams. They're also sending, into their email and into other different communication methods, but a really great example of how to use a collaboration tool they're using every day. So just wrapping up here in terms of, some of the best practices that we see, and this is us working with industry consultants that specialize in emergency planning. The first thing is identify which use cases you care about. So what we're really trying to do here is, I don't want you to come away with the idea that, well, I don't know why IP speakers matter to me or panic buttons. And maybe they don't. What we're really trying to do is we're trying to solve for business outcomes. So, what are the scenarios that you care about? Pick the 2 or 3 that you care about most and game plan for those. So if it's active shooter, if it's severe weather, if it's civil unrest, whatever it is, you game plan that scenario and you say, what is the content? Who gets to send it? What do I want to have happen after the fact? Because ultimately, as I said earlier, you're not just sending notifications to check a box and say, I sent the notification. You're trying to get people to take a certain action. With remote workers these days, it might be stay away from the office because we had a positive COVID test. It might be come to the office because it's been cleaned up and we're following masking protocols and everything is good, right? So whatever it is, you want people to take an action. And the way they get people to take an action is by having effective notifications, speed, reach, intrusiveness. So you're looking at who's authorized to send, what content are they sending? So what text, what audio, what image, if it's going to a device that supports an image. And then who do you want to receive it? So that's the group. And you define the group of people, and then you look at what devices are most appropriate to reach those people. And then how am I going to manage the ongoing incident? I touched on this when we talked about the Microsoft Teams and the Cisco WebEx Teams integrations. Maybe it's just a conference call. Maybe you just old school want from the cloud, call 10 people on their cell phones, bring them into a conference call. Great, we can do that, so can everybody else. So then once you've game planned for that, then it's developing that plan, it's practicing it. So at least once a quarter, executing on your most important scenarios in a tabletop type exercise and bringing people together. So we publish about 2 blog posts a week. Most of these are not product centric. So if you're just interested in safety as an industry and what people are doing around mass notification, I encourage you to follow us. Any of these platforms will take you back to will take you directly back to our blog post, and you'll be able to do that. And then the other thing that I encourage you to do is to start your free trial. We do offer a free trial of our software. You can access that by going to SingleWire.com and live chatting with any of our people, or by emailing us at sales@singlewire.com. So with that, I'm going to take down the slides here, and we're just going to see if we have any Q&A. We have a handful here. So, all right. So what is one thing campuses often overlook when trying to find a mass notification solution? And I think the first thing that we often see people that are looking for a point solution. So they're like, because of either their experience or because of the instructions they've been given from the business, like we need bulk SMS text messaging, or we need to solve for a particular use case, and they're not surveying the other departments and understanding what the other use cases are, and because of that, they get locked into a point solution. So basically, getting a broader set of requirements gathering to make sure that the solution you get is flexible enough to meet everyone's requirements. And the reason we know that we see a lot of this where people come to us and after doing a little bit of discovery with them, we quickly learn that they already have an existing notification system. And in fact, they have several because they're so easy to deploy if they're cloud systems, right? Someone cuts a PO or uses a credit card and is using one in one department, and they have another one in another department, et cetera. And then when it comes time to do We really saw this when the pandemic started. They're like, we want to have a unified company-wide notification go out. They don't have a system that's really effective for doing that. So the next question is, why is it important for campuses to be able to send messages that reach students and staff on mobile devices and within classrooms? So we touched on this with some of the case study examples, but the real thing here is that, one, there's been a lot of research done and published in the Journal of Homeland Security and other places that really speaks to the ineffectiveness of mobile mass notifications only. So if that's the only method. And the number that keeps coming back is 80%. If you have mobile mass notification and you're not doing in-building notification, you're going to reach on average about 80% of your people. People to which you owe a duty of care. And that's the other key piece here, is because even if you have an opt-out solution where all of your staff, students, et cetera, you have their phone numbers, there are other people, visitors, contractors, guests, parents, whatever, that you don't have their phone numbers, yet you owe them a duty of care because they're on your campus or in your buildings. So the ability to match both mobile notification with the in-building notification is really important, because we get far closer to 100% of our desired population. All right, so the next question is, can you guys send into Zoom as well? And the answer is no, we cannot send into Zoom. Not to the best of my knowledge today. We've had some talks in that regard. Obviously, Zoom has exploded from a video standpoint in the past, and we're using it right now, in the past 6 months or so. So that is something we're looking at from a future roadmap perspective, but as of right now, no. We would need to reach people using our computer desktop, or what we call our Informicast desktop notification, or we'd have to use another method to reach them. All right, next question. How do you suggest campuses get started when looking at creating a mass notification ecosystem? And I would go back to, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. I'm going to go back to this second to the last slide here, third to the last slide. And the key here is think about your use cases first, right? So what am I trying to solve for? And once you've identified that business use case, you can then work backwards to what devices are important to reach the people to enact that use case. Because if it's locking doors, then having a contact closure gateway is going to be key, because that's the easiest, this is the lowest common denominator for tying into an access system control panel. Maybe it's going a different direction and you have issues where people are in vulnerable situations. You want to give them some type of panic button, again, either mobile, virtual, or physical. So that's gonna define it a lot of times. Probably the most common type of ecosystem that we see, or ecosystem category we see, is just people wanting to get a notification out to more devices in order to reach closer to 100% of their people. And so probably the most common is that overhead paging system integration, especially like in an education type campus, because most of those buildings have existing overhead paging systems. So why not use it? Why not give it some additional intelligence and be able to send audio to all of those overhead paging systems at once? And that's kind of an often overlooked part of what we do, which is when people think of overhead paging systems today, rightly so, they think of them as being a single building. Right, that building is connected to a head end. The only way you can reach it is by dialing a phone number, and it goes to that one building. If you want to send to the building next to, or the one 3 buildings away, you're dialing another phone number and then broadcasting. And that works fine for a lot of day-to-day use cases, like, hey, send Johnny to the office, because you know Johnny's in a particular building. But if you want to reach all of those buildings at once with a mass notification, then having a system that ties into all those different overhead paging systems, but yet can simultaneously send one audio stream to all of them, is important. So what we really suggest, the way to get started is to start with the use case, work back to the devices, and that'll give you your answer. Okay, let's see. Another question. Isn't it hard to anticipate the possible scenarios of one's teaching practices during COVID-19? Well, yeah, I would say it is difficult to understand what's happening, but I think it underscores And I think what if I'm reading into that question a little bit, when we look at what's happening across the United States and across the world for that matter, we see a series of starts and stops, right? Like, hey, we're going to have students in building, or we're going to have a hybrid, or we're going to have all virtual. And so the possible scenarios of a teaching practice are different. That's why having a real flexible mass notification system is really important, because you want to be able to reach students, staff, faculty across a whole variety of different endpoints, so that regardless of where they are, you can reach them. And that could be things like doing a virtual bell schedule. So when it's time to jump on that call and begin having that virtual class, you can remind students. That's one use case. The other is students are back in a building for a given period or length of time, and reminding them of the different health and safety protocols. So there's a variety of different use cases. We have a whole section on our website. If you just go to SingleWire.com, there's an orange banner about COVID-19. And if you click on that, you'll see all the different writings that we've done about COVID-19 and about how mass notification can help play a role in mitigating that. So good question. All right, looks like we're out of questions, and we're also nearly out of time. So I just want to say thank you very much for your time and attention today. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we hope to hear from you soon.
Thank you, Pat. Again, if we didn't get to a question, if we missed it, someone from SingleWire will get back to you via email. I'd like to thank our presenter today for a very informative presentation, and I'd like to thank all the audience members for joining us as well. As a reminder, you'll get an email within the next few days that contains a link to the recording, along with a PDF of the slides. Thanks again for participating, and have a great day.